started to genuinely feel what my own energy was like without other people's opinions, thoughts, circumstances, life situations infiltrating my personal space. And in doing that, I became very familiar. Like, imagine doing that for a year. I became very, very familiar with what my own internal home looked and felt like. Welcome to the enJENeer podcast. That's enJENeer with a Jen, because I'm your podcast host, Jen. This is your space to integrate your soul with your STEM career. The purpose of this platform is to teach stressed STEMs how to have self-care, explain all the ways that STEM is spiritual, interview those who've switched from STEM to a more soul-centered career field, and to document my decision in becoming a soul purpose life coach. Now follow me out of the fog and into your future. Let's listen in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the enJENeer podcast. Today's episode is a segment in our self-care series. We now have 5 series that we cover in this podcast. Go back to the trailer episode to hear what those 5 categories are, but today is a self-care category where I'm going to be discussing my situation of quitting social media for over a year and its impacts on my mental and emotional health. So I want to ask you, have you ever been in that situation where you're just like, I need a break from social media. I need a digital detox. And did it actually help you? Or did you end up back in the exact same cycle once you returned that only led you to needing that burnout break once again? To give you an example of myself, I self-identify as an empath and an introvert. So just so you're on the same page with me when I use those words, by empath, I mean someone who is highly, highly, highly sensitive to other people's feelings and emotions and the energetic state that they currently embody. It affects the energetic state that I embody when I'm around them. Then as an introvert, I receive my energy from being alone, from personal time, from, private moments, versus an extrovert receives their energy from being in a social situation, interacting with others, and being in a group. So being an empath and an introvert, I constantly found myself in a situation where I needed that digital detox, where I needed that break from social media. And I noticed this happening a lot more once I actually established my podcast platforms and was constantly advocating and marketing my podcast and my group coaching program. So I was that person that was in that cycle of I need a break, takes a break, comes back. Oh my God, I need a break, takes a break, comes back. Until one day, I just stopped showing up entirely. Like, absolutely not showing up at all. And it was not intentional. I believe that my intuition, that my spirit just knew that I needed that private space to have long-term change in my relationship with social media. So today I'm going to discuss, one, why I stopped using social media in the first place, like what exactly was the last straw for me to end up in that situation. 2, I'm going to discuss how my time was spent without social. And 3, just the overarching impacts of that year without it and the systems that I'm setting in place now that I'm returning that are going to be completely different than I've ever managed social media before. So 1, why did I even stop using social media? Again, it was not a purposeful or intentional decision. I really feel like my body just knew what it needed for me to actually heal my mental and emotional home so that I was feeling a deeply centered sense of peace that couldn't be disturbed. And just to give you some context, I started my job as a full-time enJENeer in August 2020, and my last a podcast episode was August 2020. So those are not a coincidence. My energy was entirely leaked and entirely used up just by going through the transition of embodying my role as an enJENeer. It was a very, very hard transition for me. If you have seen the season 2 trailer episode, I put in a clip from when I first hired my life coach of just how emotional it was for me to go from being this like summa cum laude straight A student to feeling like an absolute beginner in my job, and how I just felt super betrayed. My identity and like what I knew myself to be I was facing a reality where that didn't feel true anymore, and it was just a really tough and difficult situation to be in. So my fallout, again, was just entirely unintentional, and it was like a reflection of where I was at given the new engineering role that I had started. So really, all of the energy that I had was being expended towards acclimating to that new engineering role. I kind of think about it in relation to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I think I learned in like high school psychology, where there's this pyramid of motivation, and you can't reach the next level of motivation until the base levels are achieved. And those base levels are like physiological safety and psychological safety. And my body obviously did not feel safe being in the middle of a pandemic, so that baseline safety could not, it just wasn't centered, it wasn't grounded. And then the psychological safety, again, I was going through this like identity crisis, going through this, emotional feelings of betrayal, of not being prepared by school. So the base layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and motivation weren't being fulfilled. So how in the world could I be giving to my podcast platform, acting like an authority figure that could be helping others when I was in such a state of distress and disarray? So I really feel like my intuitive spirit just decided, like, Jen, you have nothing to give to show up, so you're just naturally going to stop showing up. It was really a moment of what I like to call a sacred pause, and my spirit slowing down to go inward. So if anyone's familiar with numerology, I only started to dabble in it this year, actually. I researched what my 2021 energetic year personal number was, and my personal number at that time was a 3. So I was in a 3 year, and if you read what the shadow side of a 3 year entails, it entails a lot of learning to clearly and effectively feel and express your emotions, diving deep into your belief system and what your past has projected as truth into your present, and detecting and healing your internal sources of unhappiness and dissatisfaction. If I were to describe to you what that year was like off of social, like, that is exactly it. So numerology was able to describe that for me, and ever since discovering it, I've found and researched what other people in my life, what their numerology number is for last year, and it seems to correlate and resonate with every single one of them. So I'm starting to believe in numerology way, way more, especially after this experience. So what exactly was I doing during that 1 year without social, and how was I spending my time and my energy? If I wasn't putting out podcast episodes, if I wasn't putting out IG posts, if I wasn't sending out those email campaigns or doing workshops like I previously was before. I think the best way to summarize what I did is, 1, I was meeting with my one-on-one coach every single week. So again, my job, I started August 2020, but my podcast, in the last podcast episode I put out, was August 2020. Again, I started with my life coach in February 2021, and my very last Instagram post was March 2021. Again, I do not think those are coincidences. I think that as I started to work with my one-on-one coach in my internal home, going inward, having 1 hour every week just to become aware of myself and what I needed and what I was going through, and having someone in my corner to support me, I easily didn't need social media anymore. And I really do think that there was a part of me that was navigating social media from this place of pain and wanting to run away from my pain. Rather than being a creator, it was more of like a pacifier and consuming the content. Like, I was totally one of those people that would end up in my bed scrolling on social media for hours and hours and hours and hours and just feeling like a sense of depression, but also anxiety at the same time, where social media was a way to escape. It was a form of escapism. So by not having that to pacify me and now actually working on myself with my one-on-one coach, I could feel that my need for social media wasn't as strong anymore. I was actually addressing those emotions that I was avoiding feeling previously. And I was now spending my time actually reading dozens and dozens and dozens of books, which I will put out a reel later this week of the books that I read with my time. And I mean actually read. I know that with Audible out, so many people are quote unquote reading books through, audio experiences, which is great. Do not get me wrong. I am such an audio person. I mean, I have a podcast. I listen to podcasts all day. But I actually started to read books, and it was so crazy because previous to working with my one-on-one coach, I was someone who totally had the belief that I could not finish a book. Like, I think the last time I had previously finished a book was in middle school. Like, all throughout high school, I had entirely avoided finishing a book cover to cover, and I had BS'd my way through every single essay, every single assignment. And in doing that, I think I started to solidify the belief that I wasn't someone who could follow through on reading a book entirely. And I started to exercise the belief that when I pick up a book, I will actually finish it. And it was so crazy to see my brain switch to this new belief that I hadn't believed in for years. So yeah, I read so many books, which I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that many of the books I chose to read were on spiritual, esoteric topics. So check out that reel later this week when I cover it. And the really cool thing was I actually started to connect with people way more without social media. I think my friends and family knew and realized, like, oh, Jen is not on her platforms, and if I want to talk to her, I have to call her or I have to text her. So my phone actually started to be busy with real conversations with my friends and family, and if I wanted to connect to people, I had to have their number in order to connect to them. So I really felt like it was creating this level of intimacy that I don't think I would have spent time focusing on had social media just been this pacifying activity for me to continue spending all my time and energy into. And then, of course, a majority of my time was working full time and learning my new role as an engineer. So what were the impacts of me actually spending my time off of social, reading books, spending time with my family, and working? I think the biggest thing to say is that I started navigating and living the life I have in front of me. And I know that sounds maybe weird to comprehend, but I think when you spend so much time scrolling on social media, you naturally end up invested in what other people's thoughts are, what other people's opinions are, where they are in their life. And without even meaning to, your brain is literally wired to compare you to others. And it does not think in absolutes, it thinks in terms of a reference point. So by taking away social media, I actually disengaged my brain's automatic mechanism to compare me against others, because I was no longer looking at so many reference points every single day to compare myself against. And the other huge change in getting rid of social media is that you start to navigate your life from your prefrontal cortex, which is the most the highest developed part of your brain. And let me explain what I mean by that. So the only social media platforms that I was using was YouTube and podcast, and not as a creator. I didn't have a YouTube channel at the time, but now I do. Now that I've returned to social media, I've actually started my podcast on YouTube so that I could use the closed caption feature. So if you want to check out this episode on there and have a visual of me talking to you, I'm looking at the camera right now, then you could also listen to that episode there. Well, so I was only consuming content from podcast platforms and from YouTube. And the difference that I feel between those two, rather than Instagram or like TikTok or Snapchat or like things like that, is that you have a deliberate choice when you see a podcast episode pull up. When you see a YouTube video pull up, you can see the thumbnail, you can see the title, and you can make a decision on whether or not you want to consume that piece of content. So by putting your mind in this place where you have to decide, the part of your brain that has to be activated in order to make that decision is your prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex, one of the most like advanced features of it is that it can think about the future, and it can be proactive, and it can be planned and organized. And so by you looking at YouTube or podcasting apps and you having to make that decision to decide and intentionally choose to listen or view that piece of content is already a completely different experience than when pieces of content are just placed in front of your face without you giving it permission to be there. And the part of your brain that's activated when you're in that state of scrolling through social media is actually the most primal part of your brain that is reacting to what's in front of it. It is not deciding and choosing from an advanced place. It is only reacting and being put into a state of that reactivity of whatever is in front of it. So your experience is entirely different. And I also started to notice this huge difference in my own energy. I started to genuinely feel what my own energy was like without other people's opinions, thoughts, circumstances, life situations infiltrating my personal space. And in doing that, I became very familiar. Like, imagine doing that for a year. I became very, very familiar with what my own internal home looked and felt like. I became in tune and acclimated to me, myself, and I, where I was living my day-to-day fully present to what my reality was, instead of resisting it in any way, shape, or form. It was actually a time where I could clearly know my thoughts, my emotions, and navigate my mental home without any external influence. So when the idea started to return of me coming back to my platforms, I knew that I wanted to maintain everything that I had established. I wanted to maintain intimacy with the people close to me in my life. I wanted to maintain choosing the content that I put in front of my space. I wanted to stay in tune with my own thoughts, emotions, energy, and not be as affected by others. And so what I decided to do when coming back, aside from starting that YouTube channel, is also following 0 accounts on Instagram. And here are the main reasons why. Like I said, I have way more control over the information that gets put in front of me. And if you know anything about your subconscious, it literally absorbs every single thing in the entire world all the time. So if you watch a scary movie, that gets imprinted into your subconscious. If even just the things that you see on a daily basis in your social media feeds, that gets imprinted into your subconscious. And so by having 0 people that I follow, there is no content that gets placed in front of my face without me giving it permission to be there. So I do see YouTube thumbnails or podcast thumbnails that come up to my feed. But again, they don't just start playing. They don't just start giving me their opinions. I can read it and make a decision on whether or not I want to spend my time with this piece of content and with it affecting me or impacting me. 2, I can now focus by following 0 people on just being a creator on Instagram rather than over consuming and having it become that escapism pacifier, right? So by following 0 people, my only intention when opening the app is to post something. And I have to have already thought about and used my prefrontal cortex on what I plan on posting, what I plan on giving to my audience, and what will be uploaded to serve them and for their benefit. And that is a completely different way of navigating Instagram than just opening it and scrolling. I'm so much more intentional, so much more centered, and choosing from that prefrontal cortex what I'm going to put out into the world. And then 3, like I said previously, our brains are wired to compare relative to a reference point. So by following 0 people, I relieve it of reference points and disengage that compare mechanism. I learned this actually in a course that I took called The Science of Well-Being by Lori Santos, a professor at Yale. She put out this free course, and it correlates with her podcast. And she actually talks about how the brain is wired, and that's where I learned this. And she also advocates for Gen Z specifically to get off of social media. And at the time, I was not ready to do that until my own body chose to do it for me. And if I'm honest, this is the best decision that I could make to ensure that I continue to bring that consistent value to my platform and actually share my gifts with the world. So that's it. I know that was a bit of a shorter episode, and I'm sorry if I rambled on. I didn't plan this episode as much as I do other ones. I decided to do this more in a flow. So let me know if you like this style or if you could tell the difference and want something a little more structured. But there you have it. That is me explaining why I stopped using social media in the first place, how I spent my time without it, the impacts it had on me and my energy, and the type of relationship that I now have with social media that is completely changed with the new systems that I have in place. So I want to ask you if you would consider this a form of self-care for yourself. Could you see yourself getting off social media for a prolonged period of time? Can you see yourself taking care of yourself by following 0 people? I know that these may be scary thoughts, but I want to let you know that you can do absolutely anything that you need to feel like you are taking care of your mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, psychological, physiological health. And if you like any of the ideas that I've expressed here, go ahead and let me know. You don't have to do it through Instagram. You can actually do it through YouTube comments. You could do it through Anchor FM, where you can send me voice notes. Anchor FM is where I host my podcast platform. And you can also do it by emailing me. So there are multiple ways that you can contact me without being on social. Well, I hope you guys have a good rest of your week, and I will be putting out more episodes on those 5 main categories that my platform is now all about. So again, if you haven't checked out our trailer episode, go check that out, and let me know which of the 5 topics you are most interested in. Thanks. Bye. And so it is. I hope you're feeling super soulful, STEMMie. Thank you for supporting the enJENeer podcast with your presence today. Be sure to stay connected by subscribing on all the platforms that you listen to, including YouTube now for closed captions, and of course our enJENeer email list. Anyway, I'll see you soon. Bye for now.